my name is Ali. I have wet hair all over my face, and I'm an aspiring novelist. For the first time in a long time, I'm going to attempt to write a prose novel, which we will refer to as Project Dream. I mainly write graphic novels, but I've had this idea for a speculative novel for a while that I think would work best in prose. I do text roleplay, I write fanfic once in a while, but I haven't attempted a non-collaborative original work of long-form prose or even a short story in a very long time, so I'm very out of practice, and this will be interesting. What we're gonna do in this video is explore more of the initial idea, do a bunch of reading and media consumption that will hopefully get us more inspired of semi-similar material, and hopefully by the end we will have an outline, perhaps a short story in the world, or at the very least a more advanced initial development of the story idea that I will hopefully turn into a novel. I've always had some anxiety about talking publicly about my ideas before they're written or published because I have this admittedly irrational fear of, no, what if someone steals my idea? Which I know is very unlikely, but still scares me, so I'm putting myself out there right now. But yeah, essentially I have always been a very vivid dreamer and sometimes a lucid dreamer, and I keep a dream journal, and dreams have always been like a really important part of my creative life and life in general, especially nightmares. And so I've always known that I wanted to create a novel with a dream element. When I was a teenager, I briefly attempted to write a novel about a dream manipulator that dealt a lot with grief, and it had a whole mystery. It was discarded a long time ago, but as of recently I think I want to explore that concept again more. When I think of new ideas, the characters of the story are not always the first thing, but sometimes I do know just from the start random things about them that I don't know why they are, but like I just know they're gonna be a Filipino, or I just know they're gonna have red hair, random stuff like that. For the main character of this novel, I knew she was gonna be a trans woman and that the book would include a sapphic romance, but I didn't know what was the importance of that. Sometimes it doesn't have importance, all these traits, but this I knew was important, and I eventually figured out that the inciting incidents of this protagonist discovering her newfound dream manipulation abilities has to do with her starting as trans. The way I work through initial concepts is a lot of daydreaming as I randomly put elements together. From the beginning, I also knew that there was going to be a butch woman who also has these abilities that would be the love interest and like a secondary protagonist. I'm thinking of writing it in dual POV, but at this point in time, I don't know what the actual plot is going to be outside of exploring dreams lucidly and this unknown sapphic romance that, as little as it may seem, is enough to have me excited and wanting to explore it more. I thought of something that would be really helpful, at least hopefully, in order to know how to start, where to go next, and to have some prose to study and see what kind of writing style, what kind of tone I want the novel to have when I write it for 70,000 to 100,000 words. That's so much. Anyway, I thought it would help to read a lot. I want to pick some books that will inspire me and are in semi-similar genres or topics. So a lot of these will have sapphic romances, trans protagonists, and I think they're all speculative, so fantasy or sci-fi. I want to read them and take notes, and I might watch some movies as well that I want to study and discuss each thing I consumed. You know, what was it about? What did I learn from it, if anything? So let's get into it. Dreadnought by April Daniels. I chose this book for a few reasons, the main one being that the protagonist is a trans woman, or rather a trans girl, and I quickly learned that she's pretty awkward and dorky, and that's sort of how I envisioned my main character to be as well. Although it's something to be said that a lot of people, regardless of their normal demeanor, might act this way when they're thrown into a new situation the way this character was and the way my protagonist has been, which is the second reason why I chose this book. Dreadnought is about a girl who acquires superpowers and sort of has to go into a new world this way. And the superpowers also make it that she goes into a girl's body, which is also really interesting from a trans perspective. But so far from what I know about my book's premise, the situation of an unassuming character suddenly discovering new abilities and then being thrown into an adventure because of it. I know it's a bit of a trope. It's like the chosen one adjacent tale as old as time. So I don't want it to be stale and unoriginal, but it is sort of what we're going for here. It is a cliche, but also tropes are tropes for a reason, you know? Dreadnought is a fun read at first, but it is for teenagers very obviously, and my book will be for adults is how I'm imagining it. So I'd like the writing to be a little bit more sophisticated investigated. One thing I'd really like to take in is that this is the first book I've ever read with a trans protagonist. And like I mentioned, I want to be informed about its portrayal. It seemed to me a bit heavy-handed, the way the book started out full on with this thought pattern of, I hate my body, I hate being a boy, all I want is to be a girl. It felt a little bit cookie cutter to me, felt almost like parody at times. That being said, the author of this book, as far as I know, is actually a trans woman, so it's not my place to tell her how she should portray the trans experience. But it does bring up a point I want to make, that my book will not be about being trans. The main character being trans will be a part of its premise about the initial beginning, but it's not supposed to speak to the trans experience. At least I don't think it is. I don't know, I haven't started writing it yet. Maybe along the way it will be. Even if it's also one I identify with myself a little bit as a gender fluid person. Overall, it made me wonder how I could portray a binary trans character while subverting, expectations, stereotypes, and tropes, but still doing it in depth. Like, how much do I want to describe dysphoria? Is it a big part of her life? Is it an unrealistic portrayal if I decide it's not? These are definitely things to keep in mind as I dive into my character's inner voice. I hope I can strike a good balance and do it justice. Ultimately, Dreadnought felt a little bit too kidlit compared to what I want to write, so I mostly ended up skimming through it so I can get to my next read, which was Bang Bang Bodhisattva, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, by Aubrey Wood. I am very glad to have read this one. It was a super fun read, and it inspired me to go forward with what I consider to be the meat of my project's story, which is having a mystery element, a conspiracy, unraveling, something to solve in the plot, and it's definitely the road I want to go down. Even if I wouldn't categorize my novel as a mystery in genre so far, I think Bang Bang is a very queer, trans, cyberpunk, futuristic, dystopian, noir murder mystery. It's like a lot going on there. Sci-fi usually isn't my go-to, and it's not something I really see myself writing, partly because I'm afraid to get things wrong, but also this book sort of showed me that you're allowed to have fun with these made-up worlds with like the speculative elements, get creative and not get hung up on if something entirely makes sense or not. Of course, Bang Bang being a cyberpunk novel is dealing with a lot of real world issues, real world themes, and commentary on really important conversations we should be having, while still being fun and action-packed. And it made me think, how can I strike a balance? Do I want my story to touch on any real world issues or conversation, even if it's not the main focus? It's something I appreciate a lot in fiction, even if I also want my book to be like pretty fun and to have humor, to not be too serious or dark. And I think this book had a lot of moments where it was just really dark and gritty, and then others were just like unhinged, wacky nonsense. I think I'd like to strike an in-between for Project Dream, but I still need to know, what kind of themes I want to explore as I write the outline. I've been going through a lot in the past couple of years and looking how the author of Bang Bang clearly put so much of herself and her values and her experience into the book. It made me realize how much more room there is to do that in a prose novel, and it just made me really excited to write, honestly. To write queer characters and fun banter between them, to watch their relationship develop, to write fantastical scenes and actiony scenes, and to outline a plot that unravels the mystery. Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. I hope I'm pronouncing that right too. I had been meaning to read this book for so long. I attempted to read it a couple years ago. I don't really remember why I didn't finish. I guess it just wasn't the right timing, but let me tell you, like many other people, I adored this book. The prose in particular is so inspiring to me. It is so clever and funny and modern yet eloquent, and its structure of the plot literally had me gasping at some points at like the twists and turns. It's exactly what I want to evoke with a novel, like sentences and passages that make you stop and admire them, and that make you feel emotions and gets you emotional. It didn't make me cry, but it made me laugh and it made me gasp, and it was a page turner. I was so inspired by this book that when I finished reading it, I didn't immediately move on to the next read. Instead, I brought out my laptop and I began writing what was my first attempt to delve into this project, a good old Google Docs Word dump document of everything I know about the project, which went from a little more expansion of what I know about the characters, including naming them and how the plot starts and develops, and even at the end, a little attempt at writing what chapter 1 might start with. So after brain dumping into Google Docs for a while, I ended up figuring out a little bit about the protagonist. The main one being Rowan Singh. She's a 25-year-old woman with little ambition in life and a useless arts degree. Not sure how she looks. I know she has half Indian, half white heritage.
I know she has an older brother who is very supportive of her, and that her mother is not in their life. I see her as awkward and shy with dry humor, and that is all I know of her other than her role in the story, which is shortly after starting HRT, she starts to have weird dreams that don't let her rest. She ends up stumbling upon something she shouldn't, a shared dream or a secret meeting in a dream world that shocks its members, and she flees, waking up confused. The next day, she is visited by Beatriz Cruz and her investigative team. Beatriz is a butch, serious dream worker from Mexico. She possesses the ability to enter people's dreams and manipulate them. She uses this for a variety of purposes in her career. She scares abusers away from their victims by threatening them in their dreams, for example. She finds out secrets through other people's self-conscience. She's part of an investigative team, a group of people who possess the dream-walking ability and other abilities like reading minds or taking over bodies. She shows up at Rowan's doorstep with her team to find out who she is and how she could have possibly entered that dream. And that's when they learn that Rowan has a maternal line of dreamwalkers that she doesn't know of. She could only access the power after starting estrogen. She is incredibly powerful, seeing as she accessed the secret meeting without even trying. She must learn to train and control it. She also has a gifted ability to conjure things in the dream world because of her background in ceramics, which she thought would be useless. The team of dreamwalkers also needs her help and her abilities because they are unraveling this conspiracy, trying to solve a mystery, a serial killer who murders people in their sleep, something else that's happening that only they can stop, maybe a real world thing with politics or something that they need to access their dreams to get the bottom of. I don't know. So Rowan trains and helps and builds a budding romance with the standoffish Beatriz as they get to the bottom of the mystery. I want there to be betrayal as a plot twist, something Beatriz is hiding, or Rowan's brother, who I don't know why he plays an important role, but he does. And I just, I want to build something believable, a believable plot, a believable antagonist. After I could think of nothing else, I decided it'd be fun to try to write a little prose, maybe something that could be a chapter 1. Obviously, probably not at the end, but a little something to start us off with. I like fun first lines, I like subversion, I like creating something absurd out of something very normal. So I wrote, for as long as Rowan could fathom the concept, she had always dreamt of being stabbed. The concept of a needle that could make her feel more like herself was enviable, but far from reach in her youth. Her wishful imagination made her daydream in even the most uncomfortable scenarios. When she'd get a vaccine, she'd close her eyes and imagine it was what she and her friends referred to as girl juice. Unfortunately, Rowan couldn't get her hands on the real thing, the filled needle that would be the first step of her hormone replacement therapy until she was 25, which felt like a lifetime. And when she did, an unfamiliar jolt of hesitation hit her before the needle could pierce. It's like ripping off a band-aid, her friend, Wendy, encouraged, then paused as Rowan's hand trembled but didn't plunge forward. Haven't you been waiting for this forever? Yeah, I've never wanted anything more. Rowan nibbled her lip. If I do this, it's like I've accomplished my biggest lifelong dream, and then what do I have left to work towards? 2 years prior, she graduated with a degree in ceramics that lived in a frame in her cramped bedroom. She regarded it as about as useful as an emergency paper towel for when she couldn't make ends meet. She was never ambitious. She barely had a concept of retirement savings. Starting hormones was all she knew she wanted. Rowan, babe, said Wendy, with a loose smile of what Rowan thought was understanding and pity. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Rowan blinked. Wendy was never the most empathetic, but it shook her out of the frozen state she had sunken into, and so she nodded and pierced her thigh for the first time with the HRT injection. She knew all along this would be a defining moment of her life. She just didn't realize it would end up involving a bounty on her head over newfound superpowers. But dreams have a funny way of coming true. I thought that was fun.
It was bittersweet. On one hand, I really enjoyed writing the prose, adding some humor and dissecting how can I introduce a character in a story in a way that catches the reader's interest. I got excited about what this could become, and I'm glad to have figured out a little bit more about the characters. On the other hand, the prose felt amateurish, like I will need a lot of practice before I can make something that is publishable. I also had the issue of still not knowing where things were going. As you saw, I know I want there to be some sort of mystery to solve, but I still don't know what the meat of it is going to be, who is going after the protagonist, what are the actual dangers, what is actually going on, so much left to figure out. I decided to put the document aside and keep reading. Now, I won't bore you with an in-depth review of everything I read, but other books on my list were Freya Marsk's Restless Truth, the Sapphic sequel to her book A Marvelous Light, and I knew I was going to enjoy it because I love the first one so much, and this one has lesbians. Freya's prose is truly inspiring. I read Light from Uncommon Stars by Reika Aoki, which had a very surprising writing style right from the get-go. It was very simple, extremely simple and easy to follow, and yet it managed to not lack depth. And more importantly, from the beginning, I cared about the characters. I wanted to see where they would go, even the ones with moral ambiguity. Another book on my list was Detransition Baby by Tori Peters, which honestly, what intrigued me about choosing this book was the success that it encountered. I remember it being really popular when it first came out, and my perspective may be skewed because I was living in New York City at the time in a very queer and trans community, but this did get traditionally published, and it's a good book to analyze some of my questions for Project Green, which is like, will audiences read a trans protagonist? Will this be a viable book for the market, for a reader's audience? Will this be something that actually sells? Of course, I know that this will also depend a lot on the book itself, on the writing, but as someone who's been on sub for almost a year now for their debut novel, choosing something that has a chance of selling is very high on my list of priorities for choosing a new project. And finally, I decided to progress on the beginning stages a little bit more. I wanted to read the craft book Story Genius by Lisa Cron. I have never read a craft book before. I study my craft by reading completed stories and studying that. And I'm sorry to say that, especially at first, this book felt like a whole lot of nothing. Like when you're trying to fill up a word count requirement by being needlessly repetitive. I know that's harsh, I'm sorry, but it didn't like me in something between all of that. Lisa Cron seems to be very adamant that a story needs to be character driven to be good, always. And I disagreed with that instinctively because I think plot-driven stories are a thing and they are valid and they can be very successful. But I do have to admit that, and I have admitted this for a while, that a big flaw of mine as a writer is having underdeveloped characters and not knowing and building them well enough to be like fully fledged, and that this is obviously very important whether a story is plot driven or not, to know your characters, to have a strong sense of them, and of course have them be interesting and likable and to be able to root for them. My excuse is that I tend to figure out my characters after I write the plot, and especially while I'm writing the story itself, getting to know them throughout, like along the way. But I don't think this is gonna fly as much for a prose novel. Story Genius had a few lines that stuck with me about a protagonist's inner conflict. It says, "Stories about what happens internally, not externally. Not fully grasping the importance of this is what taints countless novels. We don't come to story to simply watch the events unfold. We come to experience them through the protagonist's eyes as she struggles with what to do next. That is what mesmerizes us. It's what we're curious about. It's what gives us the inside info we're hungry for." It also says, "Mysteries of all genres tend to have more complex inner layer because each key character, the perp, the victim, the investigator, is driven by his or her internal agenda and viewed through his or her subjective lens." This advice stood out to me more this time than whenever I've heard it in the past while working on other projects, because of this specific story, because of the setting, because of the themes, which is dreaming. My dreams have taught me a lot about myself. I've woken up from dreams thinking things like, wow, I didn't know that unrepressed or childhood memory was still affecting me so much, that I hadn't processed it yet. I didn't know that I could come up with that, or I didn't know I liked that so much. I don't know why I like it, but I could probably analyze the dream and figure out something new and undiscovered about myself, even though it was there all along, but I didn't see it or realize it until now, until I had this dream. And even other people's dreams can also tell me a lot about them. My mom, she doesn't dream that much or doesn't remember her dreams almost at all. And then this one time she told me about this dream that she had that night, and it was very rare, and she brushed it off after describing it as if it was just some silly nonsensical thing. But I felt like in that moment, after she told me that, I learned so much about her worries and her grief and her own memories just from a few sentences that it was like stuff I hadn't taken in before. So bottom line, I think dreams can tell us a lot about ourselves and about other people, and I want to play with that and touch on that a lot for this story. I feel like it's such an important factor for this project specifically. Like, we're literally inside people's heads. It's like why I think I need to have a much stronger understanding of my characters this time around. So I tried to focus on that for a while. I realize it's going to take me a long time to do this work. Even if I start with a stronger base, I'm still someone who's going to figure stuff out along the way, and I have a feeling that if this ever ends up completed, it's going to require a lot of in-depth editing from like the second draft and beyond. I like to write songs as well, and I couldn't sleep last night, and I wrote one about how I see these misogynistic young men who have been radicalized by, you know, these internet manosphere content and their own upbringings, and sort of empathizing about how they were just innocent little boys once before they turned into these like toxic, dangerous bullies. When I remembered it today, I thought, you know, maybe that's part of the antagonist themes I want to explore. Maybe the antagonists are like is like a politician or a group of politicians, and maybe we want to go down that road as well and both get into their heads and their unique perspectives, but also heighten the stakes, you know, with these serious real world situations. I learned a lot about this project while making this video, and yet I did not learn nearly as much as I wanted to. I'm very happy to have done it, and yet I still don't know if it will ever come to fruition. I see it as more of a chip edit, little by little project than a, okay, let's go, let's do this, let's get this draft done type of project within, you know, whatever timeline. That may change. I have other projects I want to explore. I have a second graphic novel manuscript that is like 75-80% done, and then while I said in a previous video that I needed to take a break from it, I do still want to try and finish it by the end of this year. I also have some spooky videos coming up for Halloween, including wanting to explore writing a horror novel perhaps. So you'll see some of that soon. And I have some other projects that I'm basically just figuring out like what comes next, what I want to focus on next. Is it this? Is it Project Dream? Is it the horror novel? Is it one of the zines or webcomics that are in my head right now? And how much time will I have to get it done? And what if a book deal, holy shit, I wish, interrupts this project? How easy will it be to get back into it? I need to explore all that, and I hope I can update you along the way. So thanks for watching. Thanks for tagging along. Give this video a like if you want to make me smile, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.